Welcome to Long Lost Friends. I'm Elizabeth Eve King.
And I'm Andrea Goyan. Elizabeth and I used to do comedy together back when we were 19.
But a little time passed and we lost touch.
We found each other a few years ago and discovered
that I'm an animal lover, a painter, a performer, an award-winning writer, a Pilates teacher, and a naturalist.
Wait, I'm an animal lover, performer, painter, award-winning writer, Pilates teacher, and okay, I'm not a naturalist, but we're long lost friends. So today we're excited to have Gwen E. Kirby joining us to chat, for lack of a better thing to say. Gwen is a graduate of Carleton College. She has an MFA from Johns Hopkins University and a PhD from the University of Cincinnati. Her stories appear in One Story, Tin House, Guernica, Mississippi Review, Ninth Letter, Smoke Lawn Quarterly, and elsewhere. She's the Associate Director of Programs and Finance for the Sewanee Writers Conference at the University of the South, where she also teaches creative writing. So we are so thrilled to be back talking with you again. And we're going to have a writer talk. Right?
I'm so excited to be back and to be having writer talk. It's my favorite kind of talk.
Yeah, we were thinking about different writing exercises that you've either used with your students or found helpful yourself.
Top things we've learned, any of us have learned in writing classes, things that have helped us.
You know, one of the things that was the absolute most helpful for me, I did not have until I was in a class in my PhD, and my teacher, who I have to shout out, Leah Stewart, who is the director of the Sewanee Writers Conference and a wonderful writer in her own right. We were doing a class on plot, and we were reading, really different novels every week. And every week she would have us do an imitation of the writing style of the author. And so, one week you'd be imitating someone who uses really lush prose to write a very literary text. And then, the next week you'd be imitating the style of Dashiell Hammett. And I learned a lot about myself doing those imitations, particularly that I had more range as a writer than I realized, and that prose could kind of be even more, I guess, playful than I had done before. And so one of the things I love doing with my students is having them do imitations, and particularly using, say, structures that you can find. So I really love doing a particular exercise where I have everyone read Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. Mm-hmm. And have you guys read that piece? Yeah, so it's famous. It is one of those things where you assign it and your students are like, oh, I've already read this. And I'm like, I know, stick with me, it's going to be worth it. And so it's this list from the point of view of the mother speaking to her daughter, and it's this list of sort of criticisms. And I have the students write out a list of specific sort of instructions and criticisms that they've heard in their own life. And then we talk about how to weave those into patterns, how to, put things together that are the same, and then different, and how the element of breaking a pattern really highlights that one thing and changes the texture of the story, how to think about using repetition and circling as a way to sort of accrue meaning. What's an image like when it appears the first time versus the second time versus the third time? And I find that Kincaid piece to just be a really wonderful short example of how to do that. Because sometimes one of the real challenges with doing imitations is stories are so dang long. It's, when I was teaching poetry, I could be like, look, guys, here's a poem. It's this big. Let's break down how the whole thing works. You give them a 25-page George Saunders story, and you're just like, I don't know. It seems like genius to me. We're never going to be able to do that. So I love doing imitation, and I really like being able to break things down on that level with my students.
Yeah, that's something I've never really done. I always had this sort of you don't want to copy people. I understand. I've heard the imitation, and listening to you talk about it, I'm like, well, I may go off and write someone else now. But so did it help you find your own voice then? Do you feel like?
Well, I think it helped me. I think that idea of finding one's voice sometimes is kind of limiting. Not that you don't want to find your own voice in terms of like perhaps like figuring out what your strengths are and figuring out what the things that you want to write about are. But I think one of the most important things I learned in that class, and particularly in my doctorate, is that, voices have range. And, you can use your voice in one way when you want to inhabit this one character, and you can use it in this completely different way when you want to inhabit this other character. And I think I also learned a lot, about borrowing and stealing forms, so like with the Kincaid, right, you're stealing Kincaid's form, so you wouldn't necessarily want to like then rush out and publish that. But it did make me start to think about like, well, what if I stole the form of a Yelp review? Or what if I stole the form of a WikiHow article? Or, what if I used these different things in my life that I can kind of pluck their format and their style out of, and then pour my own voice into that? So yeah, I think it helped me kind of believe in my own range, which I think can be a really powerful thing.
Yeah, I think instead of like maybe looking, finding your voice, it's like, well, there are all these voices and you can write in them. It doesn't mean, what was it? Picasso, I think, great artists or good artists copy, great artists steal.
I tell my students that all the time, except I didn't know it was Picasso. I always say good writers borrow, great writers steal.
I think it's Picasso, but yeah, but certainly I know I steal stuff all the time. I steal from me and everyone else I can steal from. Sometimes I kill them before I steal. No, I don't usually do that.
I was like, oh, good. Is this the confessing the murder part of the video?
This is the murder part. Yeah. I know too, with me writing, I think science influenced me a lot, and also painting, where you look at something, well, imitation, of course, that's how you start painting, is imitating masters, right? A lot, but looking for colors and then realizing, well, other animals see a completely different color range. As I find that is really, how does a character eat a sandwich, because each character is going to, or sense smells. And so I'm always thinking about the world we don't see or hear, but that's there all around us that other animals can. I find that interesting to think about.
I love that idea of like stealing sort of beyond form or beyond language, like that we're stealing the way that different animals see things in the world. I feel like because I love history, I end up kind of like stealing lives, like I'll pluck out like Boudica or Mary Read or whatever, and you can kind of steal these experiences that these people have had in the past and make them your own. I feel like the world starts to feel very rich when you think of all the different places that you can take your inspiration from.
It's true. Reimagine it all. Yeah. What do you find is most helpful? What do you two find when you're sitting down, and do you often feel like you're facing a blank page with nothing to say, or are you one of those people like that has too much to say? I usually have too much to say. I can't really, which is sort of one of those like you're like squirrel. Oh, you're trying to focus, but are you a face the blank page kind of person, Gwen, or are you someone who has a lot of ideas percolating?
No, I wish I had a lot of ideas. I feel like if I'm lucky, I've got one more idea than the one I'm currently working on. I find for me, my subconscious must be very busy, because I will not have a particular idea, and I really find my ideas by just sitting down and literally just starting to type. And then, so
you're a pantser, not a plotter?
Oh yes, I really am. And I have to say that as I look down the barrel of trying to write a novel, that is much more daunting than it is when you're looking down the barrel of writing like a 10-page short story.
Really
but yeah, I think part of learning who I am as a writer has been learning to kind of trust myself, that I am going to sit down and not really know where I'm going, but that I'm going to figure it out as I work. And that has been good to learn, but is still intimidating.
Yeah, I find that for all the short things that I've written, I'm definitely much more of a pantser. Like I kind of have a character, or I'll hear a bit of dialogue or something that jump starts me in, and I'm not always sure where it's going. Sometimes I'll kind of have an ending, but I often don't know where it's going. But then that first draft is sort of the outline, right? You figure it out as you're doing it, and then you have to go back and rewrite.
Yes, yes, I emphasize, I mean, I always begin the semester with my students reading that little essay, Shitty First Drafts by Lamont, and just write that shitty first draft. And that is even more daunting when it's going to be a 300-page shitty novel first draft.
Yeah.
But, you know, I feel like it's the same principle, and you just have to do it and believe in yourself. And that is not easy.
Right. John Irving said it writes backwards. He starts with the end and right. And there's a certain, I mean, it certainly was, and some stories, the stories where I really know, it's the end, you know, the middle will take care of itself probably.
Oh God, the middles are
beginning and the
awful.
end.
Thank you, Andrea. Yes, the middle's the worst.
They are the worst. Yeah, they're long and bleh.
Oh, I know. I mean, I'll like write my beginning and I'll be like, oh, I know where this is going to end. And then I'm just like, oh shit, I've got to get there. And that is the tricky part.
That is the tricky part. Do you have any? I mean, I sometimes think, well, maybe just writing like little lines, and then he goes here, and then he goes, because then I can go back maybe and fill it out. But I don't know if I found I mean, what do you think?
Oh, I don't have any great tips for like how to get your middle right in your first draft. I think when I go back and look at my draft and think, okay, what do I do now? I start really asking myself, like, for each scene, what does this, like, what's different at the end of the scene than was at the beginning of the scene? And like, if the answer is nothing, or the same thing that was different at the end of the previous scene, you know, then I'm like, okay, well, I don't need this scene, or this scene isn't doing the work that I needed to do. This story needs to be shorter, or it needs to be longer. So I just sort of try to start tracking, like, how is my character moving through the story? And is it always with some kind of growth? Like my PhD professor, I feel like Leah Stewart's really getting a lot of shout outs this episode, which is great because she's one of my heroes. But she said, you know, in a good mystery, every chapter answers one question and asks a new one. And I think that sort of idea of every scene answering a question but asking a new one helps me a lot to think when I have a middle that feels kind of stale and stuck. I feel like I ask myself, okay, well, am I not surprising myself anymore? Like, is there nothing new being learned? And if there's not, how can I change that?
That's a great way to look at it.
Well, I always wonder too, you know, my problem, I think sometimes I have like you're writing and so then you can add some overshadowing because you actually know what's going to happen. You know, there's going to be somebody dead at the end. So you can put the gun in the beginning or whatever in the drawer, but that delicate balance between, you know, what's going to happen. So how much could you give away? Because I always find then when, you know, sometimes other people read it and they're like, I don't know what's going on. And it's so clear to me that I didn't want to give it away, that delicate balance of revealing and yet keeping the surprise.
And that's why good, you know, beta or whatever you want to call them, beta readers help you so much to know, because we don't know. I think you often don't know without another set of eyes.
Oh my gosh, yes. Having readers that you trust is everything when it comes to, you know, you finish that second draft and you're like, well, I know it's not working, but I have no idea why. Right. And give it to your trusted reader and be like, okay, that's what's happening.
Which is so good to know that the majority, I mean, the huge majority of writers are in the same boat. Even, you know, the most successful writers still have blind spots and still need someone to go, I don't get it, you know, or help you figure out how to get it. I think that's just so helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Or when you're like, God, this is so great. This is done. I'm so clever. And then you give it to your friend and they're like, no, this is not working yet at all. You're like, oh, dang it. You're right. All right. I'm going to try again.
And for you guys, did you find, I mean, I'm thinking back and trying to think of things I've learned writing or whatever, the point in time where rewriting became enjoyable for me rather than a slog. Like at the beginning, it was like, I've got this great story, and you think you can get it down, and you're so excited and jazzed when you're writing that first draft. And then the thought of rewriting is just awful. And then at some point it became the fun thing for me, like the excitement.
I am the opposite, and I've always been the opposite. I hate first drafts. I find them so intimidating. I lose my confidence. I have to just really like muscle through them. And once I've made a mess, I love trying to fix it. That for me is like, okay, I've got an idea. I kind of know what it is. So that for me is the fun part. And I find first drafts to just be tremendously stressful. I mean, there are those wonderful moments in a first draft where you surprise yourself, and that is really, really great. But I find most of my best writing and most of my most surprising moments come when I am redrafting. And I usually redraft by just starting over in a blank document.
Oh, you don't rewrite your original?
No, I mean, it'll depend on kind of the state of the first draft. Sometimes I start over just completely. A lot of times I will just sort of move it over paragraph by paragraph and be like, okay, I like that paragraph. That paragraph afterwards is shit. And I'm gonna write something new there. I'm gonna create something new there. And then I'm gonna go back to the previous draft. And maybe we've moved away from where that draft was, and we're going to go in a new direction now. But I like revising. I find first drafts to be just tremendously intimidating.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't have, I mean, sometimes it's one way or the other. Just, for me, where the discoveries and the rewriting and everything, but sometimes I just, it just comes, and that's the fun part. The thing I like best, it's happened mostly in novels, but sometimes in stories where I ask a question and the character answers, and I don't know what the character's I don't know the answer to the question before the character answers me.
I think that's the best it can be. I mean, I always tell my students, like, if you're not surprising yourself, how are you going to surprise your reader? So, that those moments are the best moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Do you have any other, like when you're teaching your classes, do you have any tips that you want to pass along to people?
Yeah, do you use journaling with them?
Like, I don't use journaling with them. I feel like I do a lot of exercises with my classes to try to drive home the point that like no element of storytelling kind of happens on its own. So for instance, I think about this a lot when I'm talking about setting with my students. So, you can look at a field with a barn in it, right? And you could describe it. And I guess that would be the setting. But the truth is like, you're never describing anything in a story without it being through the lens of your protagonist, of your point of view character. And so I'll have them pick a protagonist and pick a setting, and I'll have them describe it depending on how the protagonist is feeling, right? So I'll be like, okay, this person's wife has just died. Describe this barn. Or like this person, and don't say the wife has just died, but describe the barn. Or like this person, it's their 60th birthday and they used to be here when they were a little kid. Describe the barn. And so just always thinking about how really nothing in a story happens on its own, right? There's no such thing as just setting or just dialogue or just characterization. Everything's always happening in tandem. And so I try to do exercises with them that give us like little microcosms where we can work on that, instead of just saying like, oh yeah, put characterization in your setting, like good luck, go on. I try to work through that with them in class and talk about how that works. And I'm obsessed with setting. I feel like that's what's really coming out here. I'll do an exercise with them where I'm like, okay, let's describe someone's bedroom, and I'll list on the board, we'll come up with like 20 things that are in the bedroom. And I'm like, all right, well, this isn't Dickens. We're not going to freaking list every single thing in this bedroom. So, if we pick these 3 things, what is that telling your reader about who this person is? All right, well, what if we picked these other 3 things, right? So like, how do we select details in our setting to characterize rather than just to describe? So yeah.
That's really great. That's great. I love that.
Yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, it's a really simple way to kind of, well, to make sense of that. It's a tough thing to do, and I think that's a really clear way, and doing it in small bits and pieces is great.
And doing the same thing from different characters, the same exact thing from different characters' points of view is really, even maybe the same character, different points in their life.
Yeah, I've done that where you're like, okay, they're a kid. Okay, they haven't seen this place in 30 years. Okay, you know, where are we? Yeah, I just think fiction can be very intimidating to write because, as I was saying earlier, like it feels like kind of long and amorphous. And so I feel like one of the real tricks with teaching it is to be like, okay, how do we make this feel small, concrete, seeable? And then how do we imitate that? How do we learn how to do that? So that when we are off at home making our own amorphous blob, we remember kind of these little sort of technical skills that hopefully we can put into the work that we're doing.
Yeah. I think sensory, all this incorporating, smell and vision and touch and all those sensory things, because sometimes that gets I forgot somebody once said something like, I've never read so many things where there's no sound in the background, there's no insects, there's no car noise, there's no, and all those little details.
Yeah, absolutely. Going beyond just sight in description is so important.
Yeah.
And I just love it. Any excuse to use the whiteboard, and I'm up there. Just woohoo! I think whiteboards are the best.
Have you been teaching via Zoom mostly then, since the pandemic?
I taught via Zoom all of last year. This semester, I am back in the classroom. We have a vaccine mandate, and we're all wearing masks in the classroom, so it's a little challenging. I swear, I see like one of my students walking down the street at me, and their mask is off, and I'm just like, it's like seeing a celebrity or being like, oh my God, is it you? It's really weird. But I will say, after 2 semesters on Zoom, I have never been so grateful for all the things that you can do in an in-person classroom. I mean, we made Zoom work, but I am just floored with happiness to be back in person, really interacting with them and having them able to interact with each other.
Yeah, I took an all online course at UCLA this last summer, and I found it was great, and I didn't want to go over to UCLA to take the class, but at the same time there were really big things missing. I mean, I felt like the way it was set up, we never got to know one another. We never, and then at one point we're giving each other notes, but it's so hard because sometimes if you don't have a common ground, all of a sudden everyone started backing away, and rather than getting kind of a closer unit, I felt we got further and further apart as the class went on.
Yeah, it's been a real challenge. I felt like I was able to make individual relationships with students via like one-on-one conferences and stuff, but creating a class rapport was just really, really difficult.
Yeah, really hard.
Oh yeah, I can believe. I taught some art on Zoom, and then I couldn't see what they were drawing. I'd say, hold up your drawing, hold it closer, hold it. So it wasn't the best.
No, I know. Take 10 minutes, do this writing exercise. They like turn their camera off and like go like have a cookie. You're just like, I'm hoping for the best.
I know, it's hard. Well, thank you. Is there any other writing tips you'd like to share with us?
Oh gosh. I guess my only other writing tip is read. If you are not reading and reading widely and reading things that are unfamiliar to you, I guess I'll shout out one book I've got nearby that I just read, which is The Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. And I love reading her while I try to work on a novel, because she and I write so differently that it is like accessing a part of my mind that I don't really even know that I have. And so I read her and I'm just like, girl, slow down, be patient, stay in your characters' heads, be more like Katie Kitamura, and then go your own thing. So yeah, my biggest tip for writing is read. Just read everything you can get your hands on and be a literary citizen.
Oh, I love literary citizen.
Yeah, I was just thinking that too. Literary citizen. I want a shirt that says that. I'm a literary citizen.
Right?
Yeah.
I would wear that.
Man, if everybody were literary citizens, the world would be a much different place, I think.
Yeah.
Right.
At least I hope. You always wonder then, you're always thinking, judging people by yourself, so you're thinking, well, if they just read more, they would think like I do.
Or at least it wouldn't hurt. And and short story collection sales would go through the roof and I would buy a very nice sweater. So that would be a big plus.
Well, and I have to say, well, I'll grab your book and hold it up because we haven't spoken about your collection that's out. Shit Cassandra Saw, which is a fabulous collection. But it was funny, Elizabeth and I were speaking after, I originally had said it was an anthology and Gwen corrected me and said it's actually a collection. And then Elizabeth and I both looked up separately because I had never really put together the differences. And you came up with an omnibus.
Which is if you write about the same author's certain theme, but all reprints or mostly reprints. I don't know. Can you have any non-reprints in an omnibus?
I think you could. It would be unusual. I mean, like for an omnibus, you would see on the shelves like the Jeeves omnibus, and it would be all of P.G. Wodehouse's short stories about Jeeves and Wooster or something. So I think it's an omnibus's goal is to create a complete work. If you will.
Oh, I didn't know that when I looked, I didn't see the complete. I just saw it was a reprint.
Completely complete is probably not true, but you want, there's a breadth to an omnibus. And it's just a great word.
It is a great word. I think we should all gear ourselves to have our omnibuses.
Yeah.
At some point.
Well, there's that story by, I think it's Ian Foster, The Celestial Omnibus. Did you guys?
Good title.
I read it. It was great. This little kid takes a celestial omnibus up to heaven, and then he's telling everyone he saw Achilles and everyone. The literary professor's like, stop making this nonsense up, you kid. And he takes this literary professor he reveres, and the literary professor's just so freaked out he can't. I think he falls off the omnibus and
it goes to
but it's a great story. It's a story on reality and perception and what is that word I'm looking for? Pretentiousness, the pretentiousness of the literary community that isn't really seeing the heart.
Oh, it sounds great.
Yeah, so
I'll have to look that up.
So that was fun. So we usually do best things we learned this week. And so mine is actually, so I knew some of this before, but still, polar bears, actually, we think of them as white, but their skin is black. And their fur, I was gonna say hair, is transparent. It's hollow inside. And that's why they have this amazing, insulation. And so they've started trying to develop buildings using this insulation technique and for energy and stuff. And I thought that was pretty cool.
That's really cool. Very cool.
And sometimes like that's how they'll get yellow if they have stuff, or like in the zoo they can get a little greenish because algae actually gets inside the hollowness.
Wow, that's wild. Mine is kind of weird. What's new? There are
the hairless cat, is it?
There are meat-eating vulture bees. And they live, there are only 3 species, and they all live in tropical rainforests. And so they have bacteria in their guts that's similar to other carrion animals like, hyenas or vultures, and they eat meat, and yet they still produce sweet edible honey. I know. Who knew? I didn't know that. So I mean,
no, I didn't know about where are they from?
They just said that they're in tropical rainforests, and there are 3 different species of them.
I mean, I'm not that eager to like rub vulture honey all over my toast, but I bet it's still really good.
Yeah, I mean, there's something weird about that metamorphosis of the kind of coming from meat into, it just seems.
But I mean, hey, I eat meat. What am I, too good for meat honey? No.
It usually goes the other way though, you know, the vegetables turn into the meat, not the meat into the, well, honey.
True.
So yeah.
Awesome. All right, well, I'll do my thing. So
Okay.
my general shout out this week is to podcasts. I love podcasts. Nice. And I am particularly wanting to shout out a podcast that I'm currently listening to called The History of England. And it basically starts with the Anglo-Saxons back in like 500. And this man has been working on this podcast for, from looking at my feed, about 9 years now. And we're at about not very far. I think we're at like maybe like 1600 now. And the reason I'm shouting this out is that I feel like one of the like real joys in my life is to kind of continue learning. I just love learning about new stuff. And I've checked out a book called The English and Their History, which is the size Bible. And I have to say, I find starting with the podcast medium where you're getting little snippets and little stories has really helped me access a text like this, which when I look at it, I'm just like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to read that. Whereas listening to a 30-minute episode per day on, you know, Canute the Boneless or Athelred the Unready.
He's my favorite.
Yeah, right. So great. Well, I Take My Walk has really made it sort of feel accessible and really fun to me. And now I'm really jazzed to dive into this, which could basically be used as a murder weapon. It's so big. But yeah, so huge shout out to podcasts and a very big shout out to The History of England, which I'm really, really enjoying.
And we can probably put a link below in our YouTube, have a link below to it. So other people can enjoy it too. So thank you so much for coming back and being with us again, Gwen.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure talking and learning about, and I love those ideas for writing like the same description from different points of view.
Yeah, me too.
I think that's a really, really great, any writer, or just even if you're not a writer, just playing around. I mean, making your mind work, learning those new things. I think that's a great idea. Like, how does a young kid versus an old person see that? You know?
Yeah, it can be just really fun to play with. So, and it was such a pleasure chatting with you guys. This has been really fun.
Oh yeah, it's been really great. And also thank you to Maria and Alex Korolov for editing and directing and doing all the technical stuff that we have no idea about.
Yes, Elizabeth and I have no ideas about that. And we wanted to just say, if you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the MetaStellar channel so you won't miss any upcoming episodes. And MetaStellar is a speculative online fiction magazine run by volunteers. So we publish original horror, science fiction, and fantasy stories. And if you want to help support our publication, you can visit our Patreon page, where all the donations go to paying our authors so we can offer new original stories. So thank you so much again, Gwen, and for all of you listening and watching. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Next time.
Bye.
Bye.